Welcome, everyone, to episode 188 of the Manufacturing Hub. We are a live show as well as a podcast that is broadcasted every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time. And we discuss anything and everything that is related to manufacturing. On this episode, Dave and I will be telling some of our stories from our careers. We'll be giving tips as well for those who are perhaps just starting out, but also maybe looking to transition into either more advanced technical roles, going into management roles. So we're going to be sharing a couple of our stories throughout our career. Obviously, we are also going to be taking some questions from the audience. So if you're listening to this in podcast form, do know that you can always join us on LinkedIn or YouTube if you have a question that you would like to ask us live. That being said, if you are watching this live, you can always chat with us. You can send us a message again on the main platforms that we are always monitoring. That is going to be LinkedIn as well as YouTube, and we will do our best to bring those questions in. Again, the expectation is if you ask us too technical of a question, which has happened in the past, we will try and loop back to you at a later date as we cannot answer everything on a whim. That being said, Dave and I have had some conversations about the year of 2025. We're still early in the planning, but we have finalized a couple of themes. For those who are not familiar, I guess, with the current structure or the structure that the podcast has been following for quite a bit of time, we've typically had a monthly theme or topic that we wanted to cover that is once again related to manufacturing. And as you can imagine, manufacturing is a very broad field, so there's going to be a lot of different terminologies and conversations to be had under that umbrella. That being said, we have brainstormed a couple of themes. So if you would like to either, come and talk to us, if you have an interesting, maybe different take, if you have a guest that you would like to recommend for some of those conversations, or if you'd like to discuss a potential sponsorship for some of those themes and or conversations, don't hesitate to reach out to either Dave or myself. But some of those themes, right? So again, in no specific order, Dave and I are still working on the exact times when those themes are going to be. But do reach out to us, like I said, if you are interested in these topics. So digital transformation, Industry 4.0, robotics, systems integration, AI/ML, generative AI, copilots, maintenance, operational excellence, data in and manufacturing intelligence, and system software and architecture design. Again, the topics might change as we progress throughout the year, but if you have any interest in any or all of those conversations, make sure to reach out to us. The other, and I guess like the other note is we're also planning to attend some of the conferences. Again, the list is not fully finalized, but we do want to give some of the presentations, again, based on our experience, but also engage in interesting conversations with other industry leaders at those trade shows. So we will be finalizing all of that throughout the next couple of weeks and sending out the final schedules to those who are interested. Dave, any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns before I kick us off
I
with
guess other than the fact that you have just committed 100% of our time for the calendar year 2025, Vlad, I think that you did a fantastic job. Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job. If you guys have thoughts or questions beyond what we have just listed, please go ahead, drop us a message, drop us some comments in here. But overall, I'm super excited to go ahead and do the career advice episode theme for you and I. We have promised some untold stories, a little bit of background for our listeners. If you missed episode 187 last week with Jim Gavigan, we had an awesome story. As we were getting ready back in the green room, Jim had some comments of, "Hey, I have some fun, interesting stories." This was making me think back to kind of early in my career. Jim and I have spent a bunch of time talking and working together, and there were a couple of those stories in there that not even I knew about. So I think that was a lot of fun, and I think that very much is going to kind of move Vlad and I in the direction of sharing some of these stories. So you guys buckle in, and yeah, you guys buckle in. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Awesome. So I think, Dave, maybe the natural thing to do, right, and maybe in a couple of sentences, are you able to share your background just like we ask all of our guests to do on the episodes?
Absolutely. So, super short background for everyone who doesn't know me, especially if you guys are new listeners. Hey, everyone. My name is Dave Griffith. I've spent the last 15 plus years in automation and manufacturing, everything from working for large OEMs through small systems integrators. Spent about 3 years in distribution. And then the last almost six have been focused running a company myself called Kaplan Solutions. We're very much focused on the consulting. So, finding the return on value and more on the executive side before we come in and go build those solutions. That has been the last, again, half dozen years or so. If you guys have listened to Manufacturing Hub for a while, you guys have probably heard that change more than once, that description, but that's where we are. Vlad, I want to go throw it back to you. Can you, in 30 to 90 seconds, tell everyone what it is you do?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Vladimir Romanov. For close to a decade, I've spent a lot of time on the manufacturing floor. So I've done everything from PLC, HMI, and SCADA system development up to bringing entire facilities up to speed. So again, from a automation or electrical standpoint. By educational background, I'm an electrical engineer as well as an MBA, and currently I'm focused on data and the higher levels of the, I guess, of the SCADA, MES, and ERP systems. I've done a lot of projects for very large companies, Procter and Gamble, Kraft Heinz, as well as Post Holdings, and then ended up doing a lot of consulting works, going to different food and beverage and pharma sites. Again, commissioning equipment, troubleshooting, making sure that everything runs as well as it should be.
That's awesome, Vlad. I appreciate it. And I want to go throw it back to you. You and I have talked a lot, mostly mid career, in this. I don't think you and I have ever explicitly talked about our early careers. Can you tell us about your first job, your first kind of engineering stories? How did you go from being a degreed engineer into the engineering department and maybe some of the thoughts and learnings you have from that?
That will probably take me longer than 60 seconds, Dave. But look, so when I graduated, this was back in 2013. I went to a school in Montreal, Canada called Concordia University. I graduated with a double E, right? So electrical engineering. And I immediately had the opportunity to relocate to Los Angeles. And that's a whole other separate story, right? How to get the, I guess, the work authorization, whatever you may call it. But the point is, I had no contacts in that area at that point in time, right? And so the first recommendation that I make for a lot of engineers who are still, I guess, a couple of months to a couple of years from graduating is number one, try to build your network. That was obviously not my case. So I started cold applying to a lot of different jobs. At that time, LinkedIn was not as popular. So it was mostly Indeed, ZipRecruiter. And I still believe that Craigslist was still relevant. But again, the postings were hit or miss, right? So I started sending out my resume, tailoring the cover letter just as any recruiter would probably tell you. But ultimately, I still had no experience besides a couple of internships I had done in my engineering career. And so I guess the first recommendation besides building a network is number one, I think that people underestimate how many applications you need to send out if you're reaching out cold, and it's simply a numbers game, right? So a lot of people will very frequently not necessarily give up, but take or expect it to take a lot less time than it really does.
Mhm.
So for me, having graduated, in April, maybe moved by mid June or so, I had only found an opportunity in September. And like I said, I've been applying as if it was my full-time job, sending out the resumes, making sure that the resume is a little bit tailored to the job description. And so my first opportunity was at Mitsubishi Electric in Cyprus. And I had, with I guess, the sending of the resumes, had reached a couple of interviews during that time. So what happened was, as I started working for Mitsubishi Electric, I had I guess, Procter and Gamble reach out to me in February or so, telling me that, hey, you've actually done pretty good on the initial interview, which was in September, and we'd like to fly you out on site to see what manufacturing is like, right? And so again, maybe taking a step back, I had not seen a PLC. I had never known what a PLC was, what an HMI was. So I had zero manufacturing experience up until that point. But the way like Procter and Gamble's recruiting cycle works is that they have a lot of different sites across the world. You will get an interview from an HR person, and then once a once there is an opening at a specific site, they will fly you out, interview you, and then based on that interview, they'll give you an offer. And so, anyways, I flew out to a site out of Maine. I really enjoyed the manufacturing floor. I remember walking the production lines for the first time ever, and kind of realizing that's where I would like to be. I also really like the team, right? So for me, and this is also a piece of advice that I always give to younger engineers, I think that the team you pick early in your career, and I guess more primarily your direct boss and maybe your indirect bosses, are going to help you establish yourself in the industry. So for me, that was extremely critical. And the guys that I had met at that specific facility were extremely solid and still are very solid when it comes to technical knowledge. So, anyways, I immediately took the offer. I relocated from Los Angeles to Maine. I still remember how they brought, two trucks to bring my desk and my car across the United States. And again, that's a whole maybe tangent story on its own. But that was how I landed. I want to say my first manufacturing job. Right, Mitsubishi Electric was an interesting opportunity, but a lot of it was just sort of doing electrical design and
Mhm.
doing a lot of spreadsheets more than anything else.
Interesting. Let me ask the question, Vlad. And I think lots of people who have gone to work for Fortune 50, Fortune 500 organizations have gone through the, hey, this is where you send your resume, at least nowadays, into a black hole. And then hopefully at some point, 2 weeks to 3 months later, you go have an initial interview screening, maybe with a recruiter, maybe with someone else. And if that goes good, at some point, you make it down to the person who you may actually go work for. Do you, I guess, from your perspective, are you happy you went through that process? Are you happy that you were continuing to go through that process after you found another job? If someone here is kind of early in their career thinking, hey, it's taking a long time to go work for any of these Fortune 50s, would you suggest they go apply to the Fortune 50s, but then also apply to groups who are perhaps smaller, who hopefully can hire them in the coming weeks and months? What is kind of your thoughts based upon your experiences there?
Yeah, so I think I would say it really depends on the position you're in, right? So for me, to be completely honest, at the I guess like upon graduation, I was just looking for a job that
Hmm.
I would be like gaining experience in, right? Because I think that and this is a I guess something I had underestimated or I guess like didn't really know, but as an engineer, you can land in a lot of positions where you're not necessarily very technical. And I
Hmm.
think again, if you spend a lot of years in that position and your goal is to be doing technical work, it becomes really difficult to go into something else, right? So what I'm trying to say is, my first position, although I was, getting paid well, getting treated well, the company is very interesting. I wasn't necessarily as involved in the technical work that I
Hmm.
would have liked, right? So my advice for someone who gets into that kind of role and is looking maybe for a way out is definitely start applying. I think that looking back, some of the better ways, and again, I had done that, maybe with 2 or 3 years of experience as well, is looking at technical recruiters, right? So we've
Hmm.
had a couple of them, on the show in some of the episodes. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's going to be recruiters who specialize in highly technical people. I don't think they're going to necessarily be as relevant if you don't have industry experience or very
Hmm.
specific knowledge that they might be specialized in, but it is an avenue for someone with at least a couple of years of experience or maybe a couple of tools that they've learned from that first or second company. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. No, I agree. And then to kind of the recruiter standpoint, we've had Drew Horsley and we've had Jordan Humphreys on, and we've had them both on a couple of times. I don't know if we've had any other recruiters on the live shows in full interview format. And I could say it's really difficult, especially for early career, to have recruiters come on or to go find a recruiter to go find a job. I think a lot of those first jobs you have to go find yourselves. And then when you have 2 or 3 or 5 years of experience, then it's a lot easier to get in, which is not necessarily what a lot of the early career folks want to hear. But I think that that's the truth is to a large point, you have to go through the process of finding the first jobs and sifting through the difficulties, which is why I always find and generally suggest people early in career, especially who want to go get into the technical side of manufacturing and automation, to go talk to as many local people as they have. I know we'll talk about systems integration
Mhm.
at some point later in the episode if we make it to the episode, or maybe you and I, this whole episode will just be Dave and Vlad waxing poetic about early career, our careers, and some advice. But no, if we will get to some of that, and I think that is a good opportunity if you're willing to go through the stress and uncertainty that is systems integration, is to go try to get some technical knowledge and try to go get some experience there.
Yeah, and I would say maybe to your point, right, and a learning lesson I think for younger engineers as well is, the question that you need to kind of ask yourself is what skill do you want to focus on? Because on one side, you can spend forever learning, right? I think manufacturing does not lack the, I want to say, like the platforms or the depth of knowledge that what could build. And so ultimately, when people ask me, well, like, should I keep learning PLC programming, HMI, SCADA, whatever, like platform? The answer is like you can keep learning, right? But ultimately, you will gain a lot more knowledge on the job and you will progress through your career much faster. And the
Mhm.
employers will often overlook, especially if you're early career,
Yep.
I want to say, the lack of very specific or deep knowledge. I would say that even when I was interviewing engineers in those positions, my concern is less so, do you know this very specific or narrow technical problem? And it's more so, can you be trusted to be safe on the plant floor and not hurt yourself, when you're unsupervised? So I
Mhm.
think the point there is, if you have some knowledge, if you have a tangible skill, you should be looking for a job, and people will give you the opportunity given enough application, of course. I've mentioned that it certainly took a lot of, I want to say, days, weeks, and months to get in front of those people, but you will get there. So don't get discouraged, but also don't get discouraged by the fact that you don't know everything that is on that list of requirements. Because to be honest with you, and again, we're not going to pull up any examples. Sometimes they're looking for an entire engineering team instead of a single person, right? Based on the
Absolutely.
descriptions.
In fact, a little bit of meta for our listeners. Vlad and I, at one point in time, were going to go through and talk about some of those examples where they want to go hire a junior engineer for $60,000 a year, but what they really need is like an entire engineering team for like $3 million a year. But after Vlad and I went through a couple of those, we realized we'd just be bashing a whole bunch of job postings and scrap that episode. I will say, I will say before I go and give my first story about that. If you guys are early in your career and have questions, you guys can always please feel free to go drop them in the comments, or please feel free to go ahead and message Vlad and I if it's not something we want to talk about personally or and live online. I know that we a couple of months back had someone come on talking about a major health and safety question or violation that actually concerned all of us, Vlad, myself, and whomever the guest was, enough to like pause the episode for 20 minutes to go talk about that specific question. But that's also one of those that you maybe don't want to go talk about live on air. I will say that if there is a like huge health and safety violation and you're worried that you or someone else is going to get killed, literally nothing and no job is worth the potential of serious injury. Having said that, to go away from the serious injury, I guess for anyone who doesn't know, my technical background is in aviation and aerospace. I went and got certified by the FAA to go work on airplanes, in part because it was a lot of fun and I wanted to go find some more technical knowledge. And I was looking for something at that point in time to go give me the opportunity to do a bunch of travel and to go do a bunch of other fun things. And so I went down to tech school. I think it was a great opportunity. I had a lot of fun with it. I bounced around for, I don't know, a year or two after that, doing some different things before I went back to school. And so while I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, I went and took a job at a organization who will remain nameless. It was a fairly small, I suppose, small to medium sized OEM, but in aviation and aerospace, if you're looking to go put together airplane fuselages, they are a fairly large company and organization. They had just moved their U.S. facilities to like 20 minutes from where my parents live. It was right across the street from the school that I was going to at that point in time. So I'm like, yes, this would be a great opportunity. I went, and Vlad, you may or may not find this funny. I went and I applied for a like warehouse supply chain position. I'm like, yes, I can go do this. They're looking for something like this part time. And I went in applying for that position, and I walked out with the sales position. I'm still not 100% sure how I did it. Looking back, I think I said something to the effect of, "Hey, what I really want to do is I want to go solve these problems." And for me, that has kind of been especially kind of early mid career. That has very much been the story. Is I'm looking to go solve fun, interesting, complex, technical customer problems, and it doesn't really matter where those lead, but that is what I was looking for. And so I walked in for a part-time uh, supply chain warehouse position. I walked out with a part-time sales position, and I don't know, like 3 months maybe or so after that, are the only engineer in the Americas at that point in time, Vlad, had a baby. She went on maternity leave. And so somehow, Dave, I just became the engineer. I don't really know how it happened. But it was kind of like, well, Dave, this is all your responsibility now. I hope you've learned and glistened all of that information from the, I don't know, 100 hours that you've sat next to Laura the engineer. And then there are also a whole bunch of engineers over in Germany who will, as I know now, respond exactly as German engineers do, and not how early 20 something Americans would like them to respond of, yes, we can just go make this slight change on this bent piece of sheet metal, or yes, we can go accept this variance or variation. Looking back now, I know that they have responded exactly as I now would expect them to respond. They just didn't necessarily respond as as I wanted them to respond at that point. And so it was very interesting. My background, kind of almost the exact opposite of Vlad going to work for P&G, is it was very much kind of one of those fire hose opportunities of, hey, there's all this opportunity to go do this thing. And if I said yes, I got to go do this thing. And hey, there's all this opportunity to do all of this engineering work, or to go find fixture shops, or to go find a local group who can go CNC and machine all of these parts, because we want to go find the opportunity to build them in the US as opposed to having to ship all of the spare parts over from Europe. And so it was a good opportunity. I learned a lot, both on the things that I got to do, the software I got to use. So it was like the, I don't know, 100th time I had opened CATIA. I don't know if you guys use CATIA at engineering college, Vlad. It's what most of the aerospace companies and what most of the automotive companies have gone to. It's very similar to like SolidWorks. But fun fact, Vlad, I don't think I've ever told you this. The license that I had for that was 100% in German. There was like, basically, once I hit the start button on it, all of the commands, all of the little tabs up top, everything 100% was in German. And so that was a fun, interesting, I don't know, number of hours in my life trying to work on a very underpowered computer, attempting to figure out the command that I need to go find the millimeters to convert it over into standard American units in order to go give answers back to customers. And so it was a fun, interesting learning lesson on my side.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, I guess, like those pieces fall in place, right? Like you've mentioned that you had to step up and, I guess, take over the position of a person that was on maternity leave. And sometimes,
Mhm,
those opportunities could be a huge plus or like a career
mhm,
booster, and sometimes they could be a huge minus, right? Because now you're doing the role of two people but paid for a single person, and you're there 60, 80 hours. And sometimes I almost wonder if those roles are, again, like purposefully cut in order to reduce headcount. But that's a whole
mhm,
other, I think, separate conversation, right? I think that it's interesting that you got to experience that. I will also say that there's definitely going to be big differences between large and small companies, and I think you learn
absolutely.
different skill sets. Yeah, you learn different skill sets in both, right? So for me, I guess the structure and sort of the, again, I refer to this all the time, the IWS system from
Mhm,
Procter and Gamble is almost like it embedded me even in my daily life, right? I even write, um, I guess it's standard operating procedures, but at P&G they were called CBAs, or current best approach. It's
Hmm.
how to do something, well, I guess not necessarily always simple, but how to do something in a sequence of steps. I write that even for my daily life now, right? So it's uh it's
Okay.
just again, it depends what you learn and where, and I think you can take different things from those different experience. So I think neither of them are better or worse per se, but they're just
Mhm.
different. I think we have a good question in the chat before we sort of like move on to the next topic. So let me bring that in, read it, and let you maybe take a first stab at it. So Yusuf is saying, "Hello, Dave and Vlad. I first worked at an electrical company and then in automation for 1.5 years. I'm currently working as a project engineer. I don't really like my current job. I want to work on big projects in foreign countries. How do I need to improve myself in the field of PLC and automation? Is it useful to get a master's degree? Thanks in advance. Currently based out of Turkey."
Absolutely. So, Yusuf, one, thank you for hanging out with us at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and watching the show. I think, first off, I think you have some good experience, especially working at an electrical company and then moving into automation and as a project engineer, right? So I think first and foremost that's good experience. I think that once you get some amount of experience, be it a couple of years or 3 to 5 years, there are more opportunities that come through that. But talking about wanting to improve yourself in PLC and automation, and use that to go work for kind of big projects in foreign countries, I think that there are a couple of things, right? So I think first you have to understand if you have the PLCs or perhaps the PLC and automation skills in order to get you there. I imagine over in Europe and most of the places that you would work, that would be Siemens and TIA Portal and the S7 1500, perhaps some other DCSs, but I imagine most of that is on the Siemens side. And so, if you have that experience, on the PLC side, I think it's taking kind of a step back and looking to see what other information, what other value can you gain from your current position. If it's training courses, if it is other project experience, if it is maybe shifting positions to work on something else, I think kind of any and all of those are good to see how you can maximize what you're currently doing at your current position. And then I would say on the other side, kind of go highlight the companies that do these big projects. There's probably a list. I don't know if it's 5 companies or if it's 50 companies in Turkey, but there's probably a list of people who, are doing these projects. And then I would suggest networking with them if it's possible, if they're local and there are meetups, or if you can go send them a message and buy them a coffee or something like that, and just be very honest saying, hey, I'm early in my career. I would like to do kind of this type of work. Can you tell me, kind of based upon your experience, what the best way it is to go work for a company like yours? Like, what would my profile need to be? Having said that, I don't know if a master's degree is going to be useful for what you are working on. And I feel like for a large extent, it's the difference of Vlad and I living in America and North America versus lots of other places. So I know lots of other groups in South America and in Europe who lots of the people working in this space are getting master's degrees, and lots of people working in this space are going and getting their MBAs as a kind of career continuation for some of these large companies. And so it's really hard to guess as to if that would be valuable for you. I would guess that if you are kind of working in automation and want to continue to work in automation, then the best way would be to kind of focus on the automation skills. If you want to go transition to some sort of artificial intelligence or business or something else, the master's degree might allow you to go reposition yourself and your skill set for that.
Yeah,
Vlad, you have any other thoughts for Yusuf?
Yeah, I think that the only reason I would ever recommend a master's in
Mhm.
Yusuf's position, again, not knowing all the details, is if you're looking to relocate for those projects, right? If you're
Mhm.
implying that, projects in foreign countries, meaning that you would move there, either to US, Canada, or somewhere in Europe, then I think a master's is an easy path, because otherwise it's very difficult to just relocate or find a company that would sponsor you, right? But if
Mhm.
you go the master's route, and sometimes I would even recommend, a 1 year master's instead of, again, you can find and research the universities yourself, but ultimately a lot of people from outside of those countries would go and do a 1 year master's in US, Canada, or different countries in Europe in order to then find employment in those countries. But I think if you're staying in Turkey and if you're looking for companies that do integration work outside of Turkey, I really don't see how a master's would help you based on your current background, at least based on what you've written.
Absolutely. Vlad, before we go jump over to mid-career, do you have any thoughts or recommendations looking back on your early career that you want to kind of bequeath on our listeners? Any kind of thought, anything that you thought you did really well, or anything that you wish you would have changed, or perhaps kind of pushed the gas pedal a little bit harder?
Sure, and I guess I can share the advice that I've given maybe to people that I've talked to a little bit more in private, right? And the learning point for me was everyone's going to graduate with the exact same knowledge in, let's call it, if you're an electrical engineer, a mechanical engineer, industrial, right? So everyone's going to have knowledge of, control systems. Everyone's going to have a base foundation in programming, whether that's in C, Python. Everyone's going to have learned, a tool that Dave described, either CATIA or SolidWorks or whatever. I think for me, a very important learning point and lesson, even when I was interviewing people, was what sets you apart from all your other classmates, right? And that does not necessarily need to be a technical skill, but it needs to be something interesting about you, whether you've, been part of a club maybe in university and you've ran some events, or maybe you've managed a local event or meetup in the technical space, or maybe you've done some projects outside of what was assigned to you. So I think for me, looking back, I had built a technical channel which was, formerly known as E Enthusiast, and I've actually like built embedded systems and showcased the embedded systems, and I think that that was a very solid foundation, and the reason why Procter and Gamble brought me on board, because I've actually tinkered on embedded systems in my spare
Mhm,
time and then shared that knowledge, without the expectation of any return. To be honest with you, Dave, I was just,
mhm.
I enjoyed doing it, and people were commenting and looking for, I guess, more of my experience. And I shared that in the interview, which ultimately I think was different than everybody else. So I think if you are in the early career position, you should be looking for ways to, I want to say, get more involved in the industry you're looking to find work at, and not for the purpose of landing the job, but just, something you're interested in, having conversations with people, like I said, maybe leading a local workshop or an online workshop. I think that sets people apart, at least when I was interviewing them as well.
Absolutely, and to kind of to piggyback off of that comment, I think especially I think early career, it's important to get a job, right? I think a lot of the issues is getting the first job, and once you've gotten the first job, and even at 3 to 6 months of experience, like Vlad talked about with Mitsubishi, it becomes much better it becomes much better, much easier to go get that second job because you found the first job. And as ridiculous as that sounds, there are only so many groups who are going to go take the flyer or take the opportunity on that first job. And then also to the point of kind of that self-taught learning and understanding, I think especially early in your career, it's important to go spend some additional time. And it might be time during work if you have it, it might be time outside of work, to go learn something, to go learn things that you are excited about, that you are, yes, to go learn things that you're excited about, and to go kind of better yourself, be it in technical skills or be it in networking, like physical talking to other people, networking, or things like that. Those early hours that you spend doing that are going to pay dividends future through your career. So I think that's extremely important. It's going to be the exact opposite of what I give you guys kind of mid-career advice, or to some extent opposite of what I give you guys mid-career advice, but to go spend the time and the hours to go figure out the problems to go better yourself. I would
Yep.
also say, kind of early in my career, I spent a bunch of time working with different organizations, right? And I feel like, and it may be different now for early entry folks, is that there were always promises of more work, or there were always promises of more money, or raises, or bonuses, or other things along those lines. And what I've found is that the people who are unwilling to go put the money in place current, like right now, or unwilling to go put in writing what those promises look like, are generally just stringing you along and are not going to be willing to pay you more. They're not going to be willing to go send you to classes. They're not going to be willing to go sponsor other technical trainings or learnings, or things like that. And I wish 10 or 15 years ago, I was less willing to just kind of hang out for the extra 2 or 3 months so I could go have the conversation in 2 or 3 months, to go wait another 2 or 3 months of it's always coming and coming and coming into the future. A funny story, Vlad, and I'm not going to tell you the company that this was, but I did a bunch of part-time work, as I said, when I was finishing my bachelor's degree. And one of the companies I worked for, I was pushing to say, hey, I'm kind of in between classes, can we go commit to this full-time opportunity, as opposed to the hourly part-time opportunity that I was working probably 60 or 70 hours a week on. And they came to me with an offer, a insulting, disgustingly low offer that was in fact less money than I was making hourly.
Well,
Like, it wasn't even close. Like, I was making like 12 or $15,000 more if we took the hourly rate and just extended it over the course of the year than the amount of money that they offered me. Um, and yes, I think that was very telling in that case.
what was your answer?
My answer was, hey guys, I'm looking at this number that you're offering me, and I am in fact making more on the hourly rate that you're currently paying me, and that's before the raise that you promised. And then it was, I think they were very startled and taken aback by that. Needless to say, that was the beginning of the end, because I was not going to continue to work forever at the small hourly rate. And they obviously didn't value the work that I was doing to the amount of money that it would have needed for me to go stay, especially working the 60 hours a week. So it's just one
Yeah.
of those. I wish earlier in my career I would have realized that, hey, if they value me at this significantly smaller number, like half of what I had hoped for, then we're never going to get them to double the money and continue to go do the things that I would need or want them to do to be a positive employer. It's going to be a short time thing. And sometimes you take those opportunities because this is the right opportunity for right now, and you get to go learn these things and you get to go leverage into that. Um, but I would say that that kind of highlights that kind of highlights one of those things. I do want to go transition to mid-career, and kind of the investing in yourself comment that you and I have now talked for 40 minutes about early career, which is
Well, I was
a
gonna make a few
shocking.
comments on that
Oh, perfect.
on
Yes,
that earlier
yes, Flat,
career
Flat.
before we
Why don't you
transition.
go summarize up the early career so we can get to some of the other fun things.
Well, I guess look to your points on negotiation, right? And having taken negotiation classes in my MBA, but also navigated some of those challenges in my career, I think a couple of comments. So, number one, I would say that people tend to, how to say it, always perceive themselves maybe as more valuable. So what I would usually recommend is figure out where the leverage points are, right? Like what I mean
Mhm.
by that is, hey, I have delivered on this project which delivered x number of dollars to the company. Based on that, I would like to, get a higher salary going forward.
Mhm.
Or, for example, I've invested more hours than was asked of me on this project, which resulted of us delivering as a company to the customer, either early or on time, whatever that may be. So I would need, XYZ maybe bonus for that specific project. I think that's where you need to find leverage. Simply saying that, hey, I would like to make more money without a plan, I think is a very difficult selling proposition. And I think that early engineers, looking back even at myself, don't necessarily realize how the business is structured and how the
Mhm.
money is coming in order to intelligently, I want to say, have those conversations, right? The other thing to that same point is you can be negotiating on some items that are not necessarily negotiable, right? So having experience with very large companies, I think that there's going to be very tiered payment structures for different levels of engineers. But if you again like discuss with the right person, vacation times can be negotiated, or
Mhm.
your involvement in certain projects can be negotiated, but not necessarily the pay structure. So you need to also understand what is negotiable and what isn't. I think also navigating, and I've listed this as the last item, navigating different stakeholders in interviews, in negotiations, is understand what those people value, and again, what can be discussed with them on the technical side and on the business side. And I think that's a whole other like tangent and conversation as to the roles within a manufacturing environment, right? But if you talk to your direct, let's call it like electrical engineering manager versus you talk to the plant manager, they have very different concerns about the organization, but ultimately they're also to some extent selfish in what they're looking for. So you need to advocate for the right items for you to get the, I guess, what you want. If you want
Mhm.
projects, if you want salary, if you want like different pay structures, you'll be talking to different people and they will have
Mhm.
different priorities. So I think that's my kind of wrap up on this early career conversation. And again, I guess, if you have a very deep question or long question,
Mhm.
happy to chat about that. So reach out to myself and or Dave. But let's go into mid career.
Absolutely. I guess just one comment. I would
Yes.
say that when negotiating salary increases, especially in the first year that you're in an organization, if you don't change positions, it's going to be really difficult to go move anything within that first 12 months until you've had some sort of review. And yes, it's and to a large extent, people don't care if you spent more hours working on something unless the project delivered. So absolutely kind of focus on those results as opposed to the amount of time that it took you to get somewhere. But we do want to go transition into what we're calling kind of mid-career, and this is probably you have 3 to 5 years of experience. Maybe you're at the first place, maybe you've moved to another place, maybe you've moved a couple of times given opportunities. And I think that this is where there's real opportunity to go kind of show the difference between yourself and other people that you might be competing against for jobs and other things. And I've kind of entitled this part in investing in yourself, right? I think that there are lots of people, maybe historically it would be the, hey, I go to work, I want to go work my 40 hours, they should go teach me all the things that I need to know to be successful. That isn't necessarily the case anymore. And so I think to a large extent, sometimes you have to spend your own money in order to get better. Vlad and I have been going through this process off show, talking about what a PLC trainer and kit is. And and despite my kind of historically always talking about how we shouldn't go buy things from eBay to go put in the production line, and despite Vlad's extreme experience for going and buying things because they have been, out of life and otherwise, and the only place you can go get spare parts and repair is eBay. He has been going and looking at different kind of eBay sources, eBay parts, and I kind of want to go throw it over to Vlad. Vlad, I don't know if you're planning to go pop up eBay and take us and walk us through your grand scheme of things. For all of our listeners at home, Vlad has just put this thought and this thoughtful face on of maybe we should do that. Um, so, Vlad, I want to go throw it over to you to kind of get your thoughts on eBay. And I imagine so for most of the folks listening to us in North America, or maybe listening to us in general in North America, the vast majority of groups by Rockwell, right?
Mhm.
Rockwell, Allen Bradley. It is most of the gray stuff currently behind Vlad is Rockwell, Allen Bradley. And I don't think anyone named Dave or Vlad is buying Rockwell, Allen Bradley brand new for personal projects or for fun home training things. But in the kind of down the process of investing in yourself, sometimes you need to go buy hardware to go learn the hardware to go do projects and other things. So I'm going to go take a pause, be quiet, let Vlad go share his thoughts and experience on buying in the secondary market.
Yeah, so let me, I guess, take a quick step back and sort of unpack the whole idea of investing in yourself, right? So I have these conversations with a number of individuals on a regular basis, and I guess I'm a little bit biased when it comes to with training and such. But ultimately, I guess as I progressed through my career, I understood more and more that I need to spend the money in order to properly learn a specific platform. And I'd rather pay the money, whether that's for hardware on or software or training, in order to, I guess, shortcut the experience that I otherwise would have by simply going and reading data sheets, right? And so I guess the comment that I always make is, your time, I think, becomes more and more valuable as you leave the starving student status and you enter mid career.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the advice has always been, if you have, I want to say, no equipment and you're working predominantly with hardware and or paid software, you need to be setting some budget aside to invest, right? And we'll get into the question whether that's you paying for that equipment, or software, or the company's paying. But ultimately, what I have found is that I need to be able to sit down with my own equipment and test things out, learn, and ultimately give myself the, I want to say, opportunity to fail that you don't necessarily have on the production floor, right? So a lot of times in the real environment, you're either rushed by a stopped line, or you're rushed by implementing a project that should have been done a couple of days ago. So there's not always an opportunity to test things out as much as you could in your own environment. So how do you get your hands on equipment again? And I will put it into buckets, right? Hardware, software. So a lot of these software packages are paid for in our industry, right? That's just the reality we operate under. So a lot of the equipment you see behind me requires a software license. Now, there's going to be different trial periods that you can get for free from the vendors. I'm not going to comment on, ways that you could go around them, but ultimately the licenses are not very cheap. So first of all, keep that in mind. That being said, there are, I want to say, like, free or open licenses, or licenses you can reset. So I think that that's where I would start looking if you want to minimize your costs. When it comes to hardware, there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to say pitfalls, right? But if you are mid-level career, you should probably know which platforms you want to focus on. But you also know that there's going to be a wide range of platforms that allow you to get the hands-on experience. And what I mean by that is, let's say, selecting a compact Logix versus a control Logix that is going to be a lot cheaper on some of those second-hand markets. But also, if you buy it directly from Rockwell, if that's what you or your company can do for you. So I would first of all research what equipment you need, understand what not only the PLC, but also the secondary equipment that you're going to need, like obviously power supplies, but IO modules, because you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
limited by just having a box that can run software. Hopefully, it can interface with some either push buttons, motors, VFD, servo drives, or otherwise. And ultimately, think about not necessarily the money that you're putting in, but think about the value you're getting out by gaining that experience. And again, to the earlier part of the conversation, being able to present either your current employer or your future employer with the opportunity that, hey, you've learned some of these more advanced techniques on your own, and you're now able to be, let's call it, have a title of a senior engineer because you now understand either a new platform or, I guess, more advanced features of the current platform. So I think that's where the opportunity truly lies. And if you're able to make the investment of a couple of grand for a return of, dozens of thousands of dollars, for, let's say, jumping up to that title, then to me it's a no-brainer. So I think that people get lost sometimes in trying to learn a platform that is not utilized at their current company or at a future company just to save a couple of $100s, where they should be looking at a greater picture, which is, again, you can pitch yourself much better as a, let's call it, senior engineer, architect, or any of the roles that maybe require some more knowledge. The specifics, again, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of value in me sharing the screen. Ultimately, I think it boils down to researching the specific platforms you want to learn, understanding which hardware is going to allow you to do that, and then just searching on eBay, back and forth. If people are, I guess, like looking for very specific advice, that I'm happy to share. But ultimately, again, it's looking out for fakes, because I know there's a lot of there's a lot of controllers coming in from, again, countries I will not name, that will um, you know resell, I want to say, not authentic hardware. And so you can fall in the trap of just not being able to run the software and utilize the hardware, and it's very difficult then to return, get support, etc. So there's going to be some pitfalls. If you guys have questions on that side, happy to share, but I don't think we need to do a full deep dive on me sharing eBay and going through the search functions.
Okay. I guess let's just ask the question, Vlad, because I know
Yeah.
that you have spent a bunch of time searching and scouring eBay. Any things that people should look out for so that they can hopefully buy legitimate, although old and used hardware, especially on the Rockwell side? Are there any controllers that you would suggest they look at versus controllers that they should stay away from? Any kind of high tips and points there?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like, so where does that equipment come from, right? So a lot of times lines would be decommissioned, and there's going to be a third party that typically does the decommissioning, because the main company needs to write that off as a tax credit, right? So usually that equipment then gets salvaged, and then if the company has the technical knowledge, they will go disassemble and put those items on eBay and some other sources that I guess many of us know, Radvel. There's going to be
Hmm.
Octo and some other companies, right, that deal in industrial equipment. So ultimately, what do I recommend? I never recommend to buy the bleeding edge unless there's a
Hmm.
very specific reason, right? What do I mean by that? Well, let's take the HMI visualization for Rockwell. That's going to be your factory talk view ME and factory talk view SE. For the most part, you can learn 95% to 99% of the concepts on an older HMI. So you can go and look for a panel view 1000 series and load an older version of factory talk view ME. Again, depending on which flavor you buy, if it's standard, advanced, you're going to be limited by the revision number, but the changes in those revisions are fairly minor. So you can learn pretty much anything on an older style HMI. So again, you can save a lot of money by purchasing an older HMI versus what came out last year or only a couple of years ago. The same
Hmm.
goes for PLCs, right? So I mentioned to you that depending on the flavor of the PLC, you can go all the way top of the line. Control Logics, which is the rack that you see sort of vertically positioned here on my wall, or you can get a Compact Logics HMI, which again you have a couple of examples. So there's this one, and there's going to be the safety one all the way at the top. Now, do you want to learn safety? Do you want to learn motion? Those are the questions you'll need to answer. In my mind, unless you're willing to invest in those peripherals as well, it's going to be very difficult on the very base. Like, it's going to be unavailable on the very basic controllers, right?
Hmm.
But the very basic controllers are going to get you 95% there when it comes to everything else, right? So my recommendation is to be looking at some of the Compact Logic series controllers. Again, there's going to be some traps, because there's going to be some Compact Logic series controllers that only run on RS Logix 500 as an example. That's why you need to do some of your due diligence and look into the data sheets, because you could be falling into the trap of, if you go the absolute bottom dollar price, you might be buying the wrong controller that you need. Again, if you have like specific questions, I'm happy to answer, and I could even answer the question as to when, or I guess like which controller you need to buy if you're looking to have motion, if you're looking to have safety. but I think those are going to be more advanced topics. If you're just starting out, if you're looking to learn PLCs, then the Compact Logic series, again, the L16 is going to be, I guess, the cheapest and most affordable one, but it goes up to, like I said, the newer model, the 5069 series. I think the L306 ER is the bottom of the line. But again, I always check the prices because sometimes the lowest, I guess, power controller is not the
Mhm,
cheapest one because simply it's the most used one in many
mhm.
projects. So you can get a more advanced controller for less price than the bottom one. So I would do my research, and like I said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Absolutely. No, so I think that's fantastic. And then just to
Yeah.
kind of piggyback on that outside of the hardware side, there are lots of great courses available, either for free or for relatively small amounts of money. And so the investment may just be more time. Vlad and I have certainly talked about Inductive University. In the past, I know a bunch of systems integrators and other groups that kind of week one, that is what you're doing, going through the videos, taking the courses, going through all of that. That is an investment of some time and no additional money. And then there are a bunch of training courses out there, be it Solus PLC or be it, I don't know, probably half a dozen other groups who have some amount of training courses, PLC, HMIs, networking, and beyond. I would also say that lots of, especially large groups, have some amount of training budget. And so you could come and say, hey, can we have this paid for? And then instead of the money coming out of your pocket, it's going to come out of their pocket. And that's just kind of part of the training and continuing education opportunities. So I would say absolutely go ahead and work in that. I think that becomes one of those, as Vlad was talking about negotiating non-cash tangibles, is hey, if you want to go take training courses, be it online or in person, or in the past, if you wanted to go to like Tech Ed on the Rockwell side or Tech Connect or any of those things, although I think those no longer exist. But if you want to go take those courses, all of those exist as options and opportunities. Um, Yes. Where do you want to go from here, Vlad? Because we have made it almost through half of our first page of notes and have absolutely almost completed the first hour. So where do you want to go from here, talking about things?
I think an interesting segment is fun and challenging work, right? So
Okay.
I don't know if you've prepared a story maybe to tell from your career where something went either exceedingly well or catastrophically poorly, that you could
Well,
share
I
maybe?
guess let me do the setup for this because I think that this was my bullet point, and I think you've
Yes.
got a couple of stories, and I probably have a couple of stories.
Mhm.
At some point in my career, as Vlad was talking about the non-tangibles, it became readily apparent that that's what I was looking for, is kind of the fun and challenging work. There are lots of people who can get into kind of the same monotonous tasks over and over again. And a lot of those times it may be showing up to site when we're doing the same thing on the same day. I have a client who I forget if it's Tuesday or Wednesday now, they go down for 12 hours and it's 12 hours of just cleaning and resetting the line midweek. And it works for them. But Vlad, I have never seen a group of people who are so unenthused about going and resetting line one on Tuesdays and line two on Wednesdays than this group of people, because it's the same thing that they do every week. And there are very few other fun and kind of innovative initiatives that they are going through as they're going through this TPM process of resetting the line and cleaning the line. Cleaning is important. In fact, most of the groups that I go to who run poorly, you go walk in and their lines and their conveyors are disgusting and sticky. And that is the reason, to some extent, why they run poorly. As I like to joke, I sometimes feel like Gordon Ramsay when I go yell at them and tell them that they need to go spend the time overnight cleaning this because it's freaking disgusting. But I think that it's important that, we've talked a bit about work life balance in the past, but going and finding fun work that you are happy and excited to go to is very much kind of my main goal. Vlad, I will let you go ahead and kind of share. I'll let you go ahead and share a story. I know that you've got a couple of stories, and then I'll share a couple of stories in here.
Sure. I guess I'll start with a project that I had done for P&G, and I guess what we did originally was an assessment of either speeding up the lines or adding extra lines based on demand for that specific product, right? And so we had a couple of projects. One of them was speeding up the lines, and that's I guess, a separate story. But ultimately, there was a decision to bring multiple lines to that site, and for me, that was a very interesting, fun project in many ways, which I will describe. But ultimately, to start off, we had to review all the technical specs of the current lines, send it to the OEMs, or I guess the machine builders, and then understand, what we wanted to done differently. And obviously, once the lines were built, I was sent to, again, I call it VATs or FATs. There's going to be arguments depending on which company you worked for, but ultimately, first you go and audit the line at the machine builder, then you bring it to
Hmm.
the factory, and then you obviously do a lot of commissioning and startup type of activities. But for me, the interesting part started obviously by seeing the equipment finalized, right? So I went myself to Italy, I went to Japan and looked at different, I guess, portions of those lines. And that's when I think it becomes extremely um not fascinating, but you get to see a line that is not in production being, like, assembled, being dry run. There's a lot of opportunity for negotiating on what kind of equipment was, I want to say, like, unavailable, but also needs to be in that specific line. What I mean by that, and that's a learning point maybe on the side note,
Hmm.
is a lot of times equipment is made obsolete, right? So every year, every manufacturer, whether that's software or hardware, is going to release a series of notes on end of life for their product. And so inevitably, a line that is repurchased in, let's call it, 2020, that was originally purchased in, 2006, is going to have a variety of equipment pieces that are no longer available. So you, as the engineer that FATs or VATs the line, needs to understand those nuances and needs to be able to solve to some extent on the fly what needs to be done or what can be done as alternatives to equipment that is no longer there. So for me, that
Hmm.
was a huge learning opportunity. I think that you don't always get to do that in a running environment, but you do get to do that when you purchase, $20 million worth of equipment from different machine builders. And so the next stage, again, to keep it short, you start the line, which again is a series of tests on the automation side. There's going to be electrical tests. You're going to have to be managing a team of electricians, of engineers
Hmm.
to start up procedurally that set of equipment. It's a very involved process. I guess the details of which I can only describe maybe in a couple of hours, but ultimately I learned quite a bit. That I think that's where you learn the most when it comes to how things are programmed, how things like
Hmm.
actually function, because you're spending hours looking at a line that's not yet running product, to the
Hmm.
point that it is running product, to the point that it's running at 20% efficiency, 30%, and then
Hmm.
you sort of understand step by step what it takes to get a line from a very I want to say poor state, right, to a
Yep.
very um I want to say, I guess at that time the OEE was 85%, so you need to get to
Good.
that 85% before you walk away. And there's a series of, I want to say, procedural steps that
Hmm.
lead the way.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I would agree with you. I find that lots of, I guess, very infrequently do I start from the very beginning of those projects. As Vlad has heard me describe in the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of us doing this show. I have a lot of those projects that I come into about midway through. And so a lot of it becomes almost you're like a detective trying to figure out what were these people thinking when they went through the negotiating and purchasing process, and then you're like, hey, it seems like we're going to have these issues. And then you go and try to hunt down the issues. And in my experience, you almost exclusively are going to have all of the issues that you look at and think, hey, this doesn't really make sense. And so it's very much going through the process of, hey, what can we change? Can we change the size of the tanks? Can we go add these features? I think we're going to go run into this issue on the feed side. I think we're going to go run into this issue on the palletizer side. What can possibly be changed in process of all of these things being built? And then after the in process of all of these things being built, what can we go to do to change on our side internally or perhaps externally to help mitigate as many of these issues as possible? So I think that, well, I guess I would describe it as it could be fun. I think Vlad would describe it as it could be fun, but I don't want anyone to not think about how stressful it is kind of in process in person. Like as Vlad was describing, he's halfway across the world and he's the dude who has to negotiate this with people who may or may not be speaking the same language as he is. And they're like, yeah, Vlad, just go get it done, but we can't pay any more money. And you have to you have to get this group to go commit to these changes, and it has to deliver on X day, and it has to hit X metrics. And Vlad's like, but I'm over across the world and it's running at 4% OEE, and we've got these $200 million worth of technical issues. And at the end of the day, all they care is that it shows up on time and on budget, and runs the rate that they want it to run, which is almost never feasible in any of these situations. So having said that, I agree. Like a lot of that is fun work. A lot of that is lots of months or years of one's life. But I don't want to undersell how potentially stressful that work can be to anyone who is listening who hasn't gone and done the work that we are describing right now, Vlad.
Yeah, I can tell you it is very stressful. I
Mhm.
I still sometimes have, dreams where the line is not running as well as it should. So it is there's a lot of again, like to Dave's point, I think there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of very tight
Mhm.
deadlines. There's a lot of equipment that is sitting on the floor not producing. So it is
Yeah.
yes, I didn't mean to undersell all the details, but I think there's a lot of again, there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of
Mhm.
different groups, there's a lot of cultural differences as well, right? As I've mentioned, I went to Italy, I went to Japan. I think both of those cultures
Mhm.
do and negotiate things very differently. So navigating those nuances, and to be honest with you, I was never formally trained on that, but understanding those relationships, building those relationships,
Mhm.
and talking to those groups is a skill that is, I think, developed. And the more you're put in those situations, the better you'll become. But it is no doubt a stressful environment the first or many times that you go through that process.
Absolutely. No, I think you did a great job describing the fun and challenging part of that. I just wanted to add in a little flavor for any of our listeners who might perhaps think that, hey, Dave and Vlad have really sold this really well. This is what I want to go do. It may not be the thing that you want to go do all day, every day. Vlad, I want to go hit the final questions that we have, but you and I promised that we were going to talk about one thing beyond technical roles of starting your own company, and I feel like you and I have both agreed on this. In short, should people start their own company?
No.
That was a little quiet. One more time.
No. I look,
Uh,
I guess I always advise people not to do it because I think that at least most professionals that I talk to
mhm,
underestimate what it takes on the back end, right?
mhm,
And what I mean by that is most people are excellent at their job and they think that once they start their own company, they're just
mhm.
going to do more of that and they're going to land better projects. But the reality
Yep.
is, usually you start doing worse projects, at least at the beginning, but you now also have the responsibility of number one, hunt for work, number
Mhm,
two, sort of like juggle and manage the administrative tasks, but also to deliver on that work, right? So you're
mhm,
not, instead of just being a technical professional for, let's call it 40 hours to 50 hours a week, you now have an overhead of 20 to 30 hours at the very least of
mhm,
sort of doing business, right? Which is not usually the work that people want to do, at least in the early stages or at
mhm,
those stages in their career. So I look, I think that there's a lot of jobs with very good groups, and if your goal
mhm,
is to just do better projects, I think you should talk to those groups or even your current employer before you make the leap, right? And the book that if I'm not mistaken, I think Preston was the first one that recommended the E Myth Revisited. I think
Hmm.
it's an excellent book, right? It's the sort of, it peels back the onion of this illusion that, again, if you're a good professional, you go on your own and you're going to be doing a lot more of that work. I think the transition is more that you start doing a lot more managerial work, which again is not suited for everyone. But highly recommended the E Myth Revisited.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good. And just to kind of double down on what Vlad was saying, I think we see lots of technical folks who are making $50 an hour, $60 an hour, and say, "Hey, I'm being billed out at $150 an hour. I should just go do this work, and I could go make three times as much as what I'm making." And they miss the concept of overhead, and they miss the concept of insurance and the hours it takes to do the business stuff. And then once you get beyond that first contract, then you have to go find the next contract, and there's some amount of time in between those contracts, and then maybe you want to hire, and then at some point you're managing as opposed to doing the technical work. So I think that there are lots of things that people may not realize are included in that. As Vlad said, if you're really good on the technical side, then you probably are significantly undervaluing the sales side or the relationship side or the business overhead, invoicing, getting paid, paying people side of things. And I've seen groups successful starting from just the technical side. But I find if it's just one person attempting to go do all of that work, it can absolutely be overwhelming. And I think you see lots of, I think that is to a large extent why we see lots of specifically smaller integration companies that never get above that, especially if there's one really talented person. They're just the roadblock of quite literally everything else in the organization because everything runs through them, be it the signing of the NDAs or the going out and finding work or the answering the technical questions or the clients coming and having an issue and then them having to go finish it. And at some point, you've got 4 dozen things that you have to go work on. And you've done literally nothing that was on your list of things to do. So I think I've seen it over and over again. And I'm going to go transition this into the go predict the future thing. I think Vlad and I have talked about it in the past. I think that we're going to see a large number of these smaller groups cease to exist, whether they get rolled up, whether a bunch of them combine forces, both on kind of the smaller service provider side, as well as I think we'll see a lot of the kind of smaller to medium sized venture backed startups that are not revenue or that are not, high revenue or net profitable. I think in the next probably 2 or 3 years, we're going to see those groups kind of shrink in number size. And I think that market is going to condense significantly. And I think honestly, it's going to be valuable for the greater markets that we see, in order to have less of these smaller groups, at least less of these smaller groups by 10 people showing up to bid meetings. Vlad, what is your prediction of the future?
Yeah, so I guess on my side, maybe the whole like startup ecosystem aside, I think that I'm still a very big believer in data. I think
Mhm.
that there's been a lot of companies that are providing different solutions when it comes to industrial or manufacturing data at a, I guess, at different layers, right? So there's going to be companies that extract data, there's companies that store data, there's companies that help visualize data. I'm a big believer that I don't think that manufacturers are necessarily using the data they should be using to drive the right decisions. And again, I can elaborate on the reasons, but I think there's multiple, I want to say technical challenges, but also personnel challenges. I simply don't think that we have the people nor the architectures in place to fully realize those gains. So I think that in the next, 3 to 5 years, the market will, so to speak, sort itself out, right? Whether
Mhm.
that's through acquisitions, mergers, or different groups adding more solutions, whether that's again AI, or whether that's the basics, sort of the plumbing, so to speak,
Mhm.
of manufacturing and data acquisition. I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of investments in that space, but I think that things will get quite significantly better in 3 to 5 years. I myself again am continuing to look in that direction. I think there's a lot of solutions that are coming out on the market. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think, like I said, there's going to be investments in startups, larger companies, and smaller on that side. What about you? What does I guess besides the integrators being rolled up, predict the future looks like for you in manufacturing?
Um, I I guess let me throw out a hope, right? So I hope that some of the concepts and everything else that we're talking about here on Manufacturing Hub, but also in the greater LinkedIn ecosystem, actually show up on the plant floor. I feel like most of the time we're talking about smart manufacturing and digital transformation in Industry 4.0. And so many of these, even medium to large size companies, haven't even begun this journey, right? Like the concepts excite them, but
Yep.
especially a lot of these legacy companies haven't started investing the time or the money because they're so focused on just continuing to run. So I think my hope for the future, and maybe the prediction for the future, is that we'll start to see some of these large size, less than Fortune 5,000, but large size manufacturing companies in the hundreds of millions to billions of dollars a year go through the process of investing time and money in the technologies that we're talking about, helping to kind of bridge that gap of the concepts of what could be with what we're actually seeing. And if my kind of early conversations are helping push through, I think artificial intelligence will be that gateway drug to at least start those conversations. I don't necessarily think those groups are going to end up with some sort of artificial intelligence, like legitimate artificial intelligence solution, but I do believe that we're going to see a number of the groups start looking at artificial intelligence, maybe discover some of the data, maybe discover some of these other things that we've been talking about for years and years, and be like, whoa, this makes a lot of sense. Let's go build a single pane of glass dashboard. Let's go through this process of solving these problems and being able to leverage that in order to help make their manufacturing facility smarter and better.
Yeah, I would say, like my kind of comment, I think that AI, if nothing else, will push manufacturing companies to clean up their data, right? And to use your comment earlier, the I guess like remove the sticky mess that is within the like the data silos, the distributed platforms. And I think that again in the years to come, that's going to get in order. I will hopefully see some interesting applications in the next few months to the next 2 years, but we'll see
Mhm.
how things get addressed. But like I said, I think it puts eyeballs on the architecture, on the data, so there's certainly a lot of opportunities. What do you have as
Absolutely.
far as career advice for our listeners?
I think that we've honestly given a lot of really good kind of technical career advice for that. I would say that for me, and I did not start doing it kind of early in my career, early to mid career, but I wish I had, is to really take an opportunity when if it is presented, or kind of force upon yourself the opportunity to really sit back and think about what it is that you want to do. So if you own a business, go and spend some time, be it during the holidays, or go block out a couple of days or a week and really think about, hey, this worked, this didn't work, this is the direction I want to go in 2025. These are the clients I had that were good clients, these are the clients I had were bad clients. We had some folks on Manufacturing Hub, I won't shout it out because I don't know if we should continue to talk about it with their names, but talk about how every year they fire the bottom 10% of their clients, right? It's like, hey, you guys were not the best clients. You were either super late in paying, or we spent 500 hours trying to negotiate this contract and you guys didn't kind of keep up your end of the bargain. But really look at clients that are good clients. In my experience, good clients are going to be like, I am looking for this. This is when I'd like to start, and you start in a reasonable time. Bad clients do the exact opposite, and you just keep going round and round. I think we all have those clients. I know I certainly do, that I know that I'm going to go put in a proposal and it's going to take 6 months, but we will eventually get there. I would kind of put those kind of mid range. But I think it's important to go kind of list your clients, look at what is working, look at what's not working, and then go make that high level decision of where you want to go. I think similarly, If you are more of an individual contributor or manager, go decide what you want to do with next year for your career, whether it's you want to go find time to invest in yourself, whether it's you need to go find some more work life balance, whether it's, a whole bunch of other things. And I would say, like, especially if you haven't taken a vacation and you don't own the company, or even if you haven't taken a vacation, you do own the company, you should go take a vacation. I think it's really important. I think Vlad was mentioning when he came back from his vacation, I think on the show, of how great vacations are and that he feels like he should go take more than one vacation every 2 or 3 years, which is, I told him absolutely he should. But I think it's just like those things of, you go and you take a step back and you take that opportunity to really reflect on what has been good, what hasn't been good, and what you want to do in the future to go go kind of continue to move your thoughts, goals, career in the direction that you'd like to move it into.
Absolutely. Um, Allow me, I guess, to give my 2 cents on that side, right? So for me, I
Hmm.
wrote down keep tinkering, right? And what I mean
Hmm.
by that is I think that there's a lot of resources and I think that there's a lot of opportunities to learn something new every day, but not just, watch a video, but
Hmm.
actually implement some of that knowledge. And I think that, I, when I hear during an interview, the comment of, "Hey, I only know this and I'm unwilling to do anything else outside of, that specific platform, whether that's
Hmm.
again software or hardware is irrelevant." I think it's a bit of a disappointing comment, right? Because I think you should be curious about our industry in a general sense, whether that's, picking up code assist and loading that on a Raspberry Pi, or getting a server and loading up Ignition Maker to run a few
Hmm.
things here and there, like in your house, or even getting a 3D printer just, for fun to experiment with things. I think
Hmm.
like, all of us should still be tinkerers at heart if we're in manufacturing. So that's my, career advice: explore and learn something new, but actually, like I said, implement it. Don't just watch a video and assume that you've gained that knowledge. And I think, again, more and more companies are making it more accessible. Even on the robotic side, I think there's a lot of simulators. There's a lot of ways that you could create a something as simple as a palletizer in an afternoon if you really wanted to, from absolute scratch on some of the simulators. So
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Vlad, I don't have a book or content recommendation to go share today. I will have one on our final show of the year that we'll have
yeah.
coming up in, I think, 3 weeks. Do you have one that you'd like to share today?
Yeah, so I've been listening a lot to the podcast that Sean Dotson recommended, which is
Hmm.
called Acquired. And so, in a nutshell, the hosts of that podcast take a different company. They spend an entire week researching, and then, from what I understand, they felt so they actually like broke down their process in one of the episodes recently. But they take 10 hours to record an episode that is then chopped up in 2 to 3 hours. But they do a very deep dive on the foundation of the company and sort of the history of the founders. So I've listened to Microsoft, I've listened to Facebook, and I'm halfway into the IKEA episode. And so it's very interesting, how
Okay.
those companies came to be. So highly recommend that. It is called Acquired. I listened to a couple of other things, but happy to, I guess, answer that question in private.
Absolutely, Vlad. I want to know. You don't have to say now, but I want to know. I had that on the list from when Sean had recommended it. So after the show, you can tell me your suggestion on which episode to start with. Yes, you can tell me your episode on which to start with. We will have all of this comments and everything else in the show notes if you guys are listening on podcast form. Vlad, last question is how can our listeners help you? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? As we offer to all of our normal guests, this is your open forum, not like you haven't been talking for the last, the half of the last 70 minutes.
Sure. So I am looking for a variety of projects, all inside of manufacturing. So number one, Solus PLC provides now in-person training. So I'm definitely looking, if you have a facility that runs on Rockwell, Siemens, or some of the other platforms that we offer. If you're interested in in-person training or in online training, which we still offer as well, definitely reach out. I'm looking for systems integration, but more specifically, I want to say consulting and data specific projects at the SCADA and MES layer. So if you want to have those conversations, reach out to me as well. I have a full website called joltec.com up and running. If you want to look at some of my previous projects and reach out to me, that would be great. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on this episode, we are finalizing a list of themes as well as our presence at some of the trade shows next year. So if you have any interest in participating or your company participating in some of these conversations, sponsoring some of the conversations, and or will be at those trade shows, definitely reach out to me as well. Dave, throwing that back over to you, how can our listeners help?
Absolutely. If you guys are having fun listening and you want to connect, please make sure you connect with me. If you want to go chat about projects or otherwise, or you just want to go stay up to date with the things that I'm doing and I can stay up to date with the things that you're doing, that would be a ton of fun. Please go ahead and do that. On the I suppose commercialization side, if you guys are working on ignition, looking for help and support with that, I am happy to go ahead and have those conversations with you guys. And if you guys are looking at, kind of fairly large build projects for a facility or for lines or other things, I am also happy to go have those conversations. I'm also happy to go ahead and have those conversations. But just in general, if the things I'm saying are fun and are interesting, please go ahead and reach out. I'm always happy to chat with everyone about what is going on and looking forward to learning from others in industry. Vlad, this has been awesome. For all of our listeners at home, if you're still watching live, the couple of dozen of you who have made it for a longer than normal episode, we're taking next week off for American Thanksgiving. We will be back with a fun guest the week after. Vlad and I will go ahead and have a fun wrap up end of the year conversation. And then, honestly, Vlad, I think for the first time in like 3 years, you and I are taking like 3 weeks off. In the month of December. Well, I think we'll have episodes for most of those coming out from ICC and other shows, but you and I are taking some time off in order to go prep for 2025 and everything else. Um, Last questions, comments, anything else before we say goodbye to everyone, Vlad?
No, I think that's awesome.
Awesome. If you guys have made it this far, make sure you're connected to Vlad. Make sure you're connected to me. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub. If you're this far on podcast format, you're absolute champions. Please do the like, subscribe, follow along. If you're watching on YouTube and everywhere else, do the follow along. Rate us 5 stars. As I tell everyone every week, when I remember to say these things and Vlad gets the podcast out on Thursday mornings, as we've done successfully for nearly a year at this point, more people listen and watch, which is pretty